Good afternoon, everyone. If I can have everyone's attention. My name is Marcella Paris, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I'm happy to welcome you all to the Great Falls Forum. Thank you for being here. The forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of public policy, business, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This year marks the 25th season of the Great Falls Forum. So again, we thank you for your continued support, without which the series would not be able to continue. Today's program is also streaming live via Zoom and Facebook, and a recording will be available on the library's YouTube page. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. And please mark your calendars for February's Great Falls Forum on February 16th for a talk entitled 48 Hours with an Allagash Wilderness Ranger with Tim and Susan Caverly. More information on that will be available soon. At the conclusion of today's program, there will be opportunity for audience questions. Those in the room are welcome to raise their hands, and I will bring a microphone to you so that our audience at home can listen to you also. And those joining us virtually can enter their questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom or commenting on Facebook, and we will read those aloud to our speaker. For those here in person, books by our speaker are available for sale out in the lobby, and he'll be happy to sign these after the talk. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker, Gerry Boyle. Gerry is an award-winning crime novelist whose books are mostly set in Maine, including his latest, Robbed Blind. After graduating from Colby College, Gerry tried various jobs before becoming a newspaper reporter, and now an author of over a dozen novels. He's best known for the Jack McMorrow mystery series, featuring a fellow reporter who investigates murders and other mayhem. The series began in 1993 and is set to conclude next year in 2024. Is that still accurate? So please join me in welcoming Gerry to Lewiston.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I am especially pleased to come to Lewiston, of all places. You know, have done quite a lot of these in the last 30 years, but Lewiston has always had kind of a special place in my heart. And I think I don't know if I've ever revealed this little known fact about my career to anyone, but I'm going to do it to us because it's a small group and we're all friends. I started my first job after Colby College was working for Hannell Brothers Roofing. And so, and it was a great experience. It was when I first heard about the Blue Goose. And I made some good friends on the crew, and it was a different kind of education than I had received. They found out where I had gone to school and what I had studied, and my nickname on the job site from then on was English major. And so it was kind of fun. So I also don't take for granted at all, and this is very sincere, that you are here, and I'm here speaking to you, and also that this book exists. So, because I am the one who kind of sees how the sausage is made, and I know that I know where this all began, and for it to come together like this, you look at it now and it looks kind of like it just flowed onto the pages, but that was really not the case. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kind of the genesis of this book, but mostly as an example of, I think, how these books come into being, which is, I think, is kind of a really cool and miraculous sort of thing. I had done, so this is the 13th McMorrow novel. And so I've been doing these since the first one came out in 1993, Deadline. I think they may even have one out there. It has things in it like phone booths, and I think in the newspaper scenes, there are typewriters clacking. So that's how far back I go. It's kind of, you didn't know my books would end up becoming some kind of historical artifacts, but they have. So, but I think the mystery still works. But after all the books, you know, the funny thing about this is it's kind of like when I was in the newspaper business, I was a reporter and a columnist, and for many years I wrote 3 columns a week. That was my whole job. I didn't realize at the time that I had the dream job, and I would have appreciated it more. But what happened after each column was that that still had either a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, and you started from scratch over and over again. And a book is kind of the same way. I think I finish one, and I immediately start to think of the contracted deadline for the next one and what that idea might be. And sometimes, in this case, I'm going to tell you that this one kind of came from three sort of pipelines that I had going. I had, kind of a file of things that I notice over the years, and sometimes often it's newspaper stories. In the good old days, I would clip them out of the newspaper, and I had files and files and files of yellowing clippings of something that captured my interest or intrigued me. Later, that was bookmarked newspaper stories, but which I can never find later on. But the act of bookmarking, I think, helped somewhat. And in this case, there were stories about, I don't know if you remember, in Portland, there was kind of a serial robber, like armed robber doing convenience stores all over the city. And so this was several years ago, but I made a note of it because I thought to myself, well, that's interesting because it's really not much of a crime. The person, he wasn't shooting anybody and no one was getting hurt, but it had the whole city in a tizzy. The police department was under a lot of pressure to solve this. And I was thinking, well, why does that bother people so much? Some guy it's probably a paintball gun, or why is that such a threat? So I tucked that away, and I began to think about what that threat might be and why it causes a whole community to be kind of under siege. And I think the answer is that another one's coming. It's like if someone, I don't know, I hate to use violent metaphors, but it's kind of my business. So if you're standing there and someone punches you, and you're kind of shocked or you're ready to punch back. But if someone says to you, well, I'm going to punch you every few seconds or maybe minutes for the next hour, and you have to wait for the next one to come, I think that it kind of ratchets up the expectation and attention. So that's part of what I think was going on there. The other thing is, two other things. The second was, I was raised Irish Catholic, pretty, devout by today's standards, average by the standards of the 1960s. And this wasn't in Maine, it was in Rhode Island. But we went to church all the time, and we, the church was a big part of our lives. My older brothers all went to Jesuit schools, and it was just the world of mostly Irish and Italian immigrants, which was what the community was. And so I've retained a lot of that. You go to confession, every week on Friday at 3:00, and it kind of sticks with you. And so this is actually true. So I live in the town of China, and I was going to the transfer station, AKA the dump, and with my truck, like everybody does every week. And so I backed my truck up to the hopper thing, and I looked out the window, and there is this very cool thing sitting in the little section where people put things that they think still has value. And so in this case, they had left what I learned. It was a wooden box about this thick, this high, had a glass front and a door. And behind the glass was kind of a plaster tableau, and it was of Jesus on the cross. And it was made of oak, and it was just sitting there. And I said, this was meant to be. This was put on in this dump for me at this moment. So I jumped out of the truck, and I picked it up, and I brought it home. And other people in our household are not so fond when I go to the dump and come back with more stuff than I left with, but it's kind of a Maine thing. And so I brought this home, and I put it in my study, and it sort of stared at me all the time. It was fascinating. So I did research about it. Turns out it was called a call box. And in the late 19th century, a lot of homes had them on the wall so that if the priest was coming to give someone last rites, they didn't have to, go back to the church or the rectory and get their stuff, their equipment, because there's a certain kinds of equipment that are necessary for that ritual. And so it had candles and some kind of waxy stuff, and a spoon, and all these little things in it. And so I looked it up on eBay, and it was worth, I don't know, $200 or $300. And so, but it was worth a lot more than that to me for what it did for my book. So that sat there staring at me as I was considering what I was going to write next. And then I also had been mulling kind of rural militias and armed groups. And I know that you wouldn't have to go too far from downtown Lewiston, I'd say maybe 15 miles to start to find people who are interested in that activity. Where I live, you don't have to go far at all. In fact, some of the people I know, and I would call them, if not quite friends, certainly pleasant acquaintances, are involved in that kind of thing. And so that had always intrigued me, but I wasn't sure what the right moment was to bring it out. So, so the book starts, and as I was mulling the religious artifacts, I began to think, well, who would want this? Who are these people on eBay who are buying these things from deconsecrated churches, all over the country, all over the world? So I went online and I found that there are warehouses full of such things, statues and full-size crucifixes and stained glass windows and anything you could want if for some reason you wanted to build your own Catholic church, at home. And actually, people do. And so I talked to people there was one fellow in Pennsylvania. I talked to someone in Belgium. We did that by email because my Belgian is a little off and his English wasn't that great either. And I found that there's a whole world of these kinds of things and people who collect them. So when I started the book, I had to think, well, I want to work this in. Because I'm fascinated by the whole world of it. And also it kind of touches me because of my background. And so you'll find that, a lot of the reason people or writers like me pick subjects for books isn't really because we think that you will like them. It's really because we have to ask ourselves, well, how do you want to spend the next year? And what do you want to be thinking about? And so I've had, over the years, books about Benedict Arnold's march to Quebec, which I was interested in. I followed the trail all the way up to Quebec City, the Chaudière River and all of that. And, I really like boats. So I've written books that had a lot to do with sailing and blue water sailing and all these kinds of things. So it isn't like there probably is some, but not for me, some gauge of what you will be interested in. It's really what I'm interested in that you may be interested in. And it's kind of a gamble. So in this case, the three things came together in a place, not unlike Lewiston. I don't know if you haven't read the book yet. This is the cover. You can see that it has the religious artifact in it. Not unlike Lewiston. And I have to say, when I come to a place that it has something to do with the setting of one of my books, I always feel a little bad because no place comes off very well in my books, and so I think of it as kind of, I don't know if you, on your phone where you take photos and they say edit, and you could, you can take out this sort of light and take out that sort of light, and you can take off the shadows or add shadows. And so you're really filtering the reality. And what I do is I kind of filter out most of the people like you, and I amp up all the people who are more likely to be in my books. And so I've had, reviewers in the past, national reviewers who would say, you read these books and, you'll wonder why they called it Vacation Land, and that sort of thing. And so, and I would always say that, my books were never at, that thing on the interstate where you go in the rest area and they have all these promotional things, and they don't put my books there either. So in this case, I needed a setting that was not Portland, and Portland is too crowded, and I don't mean it's crowded with people, it's crowded with mystery writers. And there's one on every corner now. And so I need, one thing about my books is I pretty much make sure that I have the turf to myself. And so in this case, I needed a small city. I needed something that had a sense of community, but at the same time was big. I wanted someplace that was a mill town because I mostly write about mill towns. And I wanted to have it be a certain distance away from where McMorrow lives in Waldo County. So all those factors came into play. And I ended up with a city called Clarkston. And so it's small and, sometimes smaller than Lewiston. I'd say less vibrant. I dialed down the vibrancy also. And it's also not, so there is some resemblance. So people see that, they might notice. So I needed a place where there were going to be convenience stores, a lot of convenience stores, a whole world of the people who work at night. I don't know, does anyone here ever work the night shift? The real night shift, you get out at 6 in the morning and you report it, go in at 10 or whatever. And, and for doing research for this book, I realized that, it's a whole world to itself. The people in the Dunkin' Donuts at that hour all know each other. People who work the Walmart, distribution center on that shift, firemen, police, and the convenience store clerks. And so I became kind of intrigued by that. So I started going to the Irving closest to my house, at odd hours. And the thing was, I didn't really, when you go in at 2:30, and you don't really have anything you need, it's very quickly they begin to think, hey, this is a little odd. That guy's been back there, in the potato chip aisle for 20 minutes. And so, but I would just listen to what the workers talked about. I would watch them. I took a zillion photos of the interior of the place, the products, the stuff behind the counter, went into the cold beer locker and shot through the windows out into the store. It's really a wonder I wasn't either arrested or, one of the women clerks would just call her husband and have him come beat me up and throw me out. But that was really part of what I needed to do before I was comfortable writing the story. And so I began to invent. So now you have the place and you have kind of the themes, but you also have, you also have to people the book. Who is going to live in this place, and so and that's where kind of the imagination comes in. And so I was thinking, well, who would work this shift? Why would they work this shift? And I ended up with, I'd say, two characters or three characters in this book who I became really fond of. And this is the case in a lot of the books that it's usually a secondary kind of character that was created just for the purpose of that book. But they become kind of like your buddies. I write sketches about their lives that never appear in the actual book. I write dialogue in their voices that never appears in the actual book. And it's just a way to feel like you know them well enough to write them. So I came up with somehow, either I invent it or they visit me. Sometimes you feel like you're channeling something that's out there. So between the channeling and hanging around the convenience stores at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can see this is kind of an odd way to make a living. So I came up with a woman named Sparrow, and she works in a convenience store in town, and she's got multiple piercings. Her hair is sometimes half blue and sometimes half red. She's very tough, and she works this shift to support her father, whose name is Riff. And he also became a real kind of close companion of mine. And he was a punk rock musician, and he, in the 90s especially, and in the aughts, and he played in Portland and New York, and he killed his liver with the rock and, the punk rock life. And so he's essentially dying at home, and she's supporting him. She is the support. So I feel like the whole room just kind of came down a little bit. But these books really are, I hope, entertaining, and there's a lot of humor. in them, so I don't want to scare you off, but those are the kind of people I find compelling. And so I also was wondering about who would collect the artifacts from these churches. And I know cities like this, and Waterville and others have a really strong Catholic tradition, and which has fallen on hard times. And Waterville, which was my sort of Catholic Maine roots, there's one church where there are 3 or 4, one priest for 20 square miles, that kind of thing. And so so I was trying to think, well, for someone who really was intrigued by that, and this was their world, and they found comfort in it, what would they do? And so Raymond appeared, and he lives in the house where his parents had lived, and he works a night shift in a warehouse, and during the day, he collects these things, and with some discretion, he's become pretty much an expert at it, and he's filled his entire home with artifacts, statues, and he's learned the different artists who carve them, and as I did. And so McMorrow, my journalist investigator, goes to him because he sees that he's part of this night shift crew, and he ends up befriending Raymond. And I can't really tell you which of these people make it and which of them don't, because one of the kind of hard things about writing these books, if I were writing a literary novel or a different sort of novel, I could invent people like Raymond and Riff and Sparrow, and I could track their lives, and then at the end, there might be some kind of resolution or some change or some evolution of their characters, but in these books, somebody's got to go, and so it's very, very hard. In the case of one of the characters who went in this one, I had to really think long and hard about it. How was I going to do this? When was I going to do it? And why? And so I wrote the character essentially out of the series, out of the book. But also in these books, you usually don't die in your sleep, and so people don't go peacefully. So this person, that's one of these characters I was really very fond of, and I think my editor could attest to that, because I would write all this dialogue in early drafts where, and she would, look at it and write back and say, well, this is all very interesting, but, you've spent 5 pages in a conversation with this person and nothing else has happened. We've got to move the plot here. So I did move the plot, and then I began thinking, well, God, isn't this kind of a strange business when you're in the 30-year mark of doing this? I can look back on all the books, and each one usually has one character, maybe 2, who I have continued to be really fond of. And often they aren't the ones who emerged alive, at the end, except for one book. And this was kind of funny. This is an aside, but that's really what my talks are. They're a series of asides that maybe will come back to the original thing, but maybe not. I wrote one book, and I got a note from someone, and they said that they really liked it. It was called Borderline, and it was the one with the Arnold Trail and all this history sort of thing. And they said it was a reviewer who said that I had managed to write a really kind of taut, tense murder mystery without a murder. And I thought, no, that can't be right. So I went back, and I'm flipping through. No, that one made it all the way. No, that one got beat up pretty bad, but they made it. This one survived. This one almost drowned. All these things. But sure enough, that was the one book where I started with 18 characters and 18 people walked off the page at the end. So that doesn't usually happen. And, you have to think I was talking to my sister about the book, and I don't really assume that family members read my books. The younger family members, I hope they don't read my books. And so I think that, but I have one of my sisters bought it and read it. And she said when this person died, she said, I had to put the book down and take a walk. She was so upset. And I thought, well, I hope well, that's not good. Too late now, I can't revise it. So, but I think the kind of the truth of it is that if you're killing off people who don't matter, if you're only killing off bad guys, if you're killing off, like in a TV show where they're just spraying automatic weapons and these figures are flopping all over the place and you don't even flinch because you don't even know who they are and you haven't been allowed to become invested in them. So the idea then is to have someone who I care about, and I presume you care about as a reader, who will come to some sort of demise that is unfortunate or tragic or heroic or whatever it is, but will kind of hit you and me in the gut a little bit. And so that is kind of what I've done. In this case, the other thing about writing these is that, I'm only listening to people, and, if we chatted more, I would, I'd be listening to what you're saying, but I'm also listening to the way you speak and the rhythms of your speech, the inflection, the accent, all of it. And so in these books, sometimes I will take a character and kind of imbue them with the characteristics of someone I know, even though they might not be similar. And in this case, I've been going around doing these talks for quite a while, but I always want to, it's one of my kind of pledges to myself is to mention this fellow Pete, who I became very friendly with, who lives near my town, and biker, tough guy, did time. He would sometimes, when he was trying to give context to a story he was telling, he would say, okay, let's see, I got out of prison in '96. So, and this was his life. Lived in a trailer that no longer had running water, it was filled with motorcycle parts and motorcycles and frames and motors. And, it was just fascinating. But he was also very, very, very smart and very interesting. He no longer could drive for all kinds of reasons. And so I would always pick him up and give him a ride, or I'd give him a ride home if he was wandering. If I saw him on the road, I'd pick him up and drive him home. And he once came up to me. This is my last Pete tribute, but he once came up to me and he had a book in his hand, and he said, "Dude," he always called me dude. He said, "Dude, this guy knew his shit," and it was Thoreau's Walden. And most people in the area where I live were kind of afraid of Pete. He had been a pretty wild guy. He lived in Portland and Florida. Every tough guy I know has lived in Florida at least once. And so but he wasn't that was just part of his kind of outward facing persona. And so I took Pete, and the sad part of that story is that Pete was killed in a car accident a few months ago. And so he left, as one person told me, he wasn't going to go peacefully. And so he's no longer with us. But Pete's presentation, he was confident, he was funny, he was smart, and he had this sort of patter that was quite disarming, and he would talk to anybody. And, at the same time, he wore a biker vest a lot of the time. And he had all these box knives, like dunk, 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 up and down, clipped in here. And, I didn't say anything for a while, but finally I said, "Pete, you got to tell me, what is with all the knives?" And he looked at me and he said, "Dude, I can't carry a gun." And so I took him, and if people are going to listen to the character who is the dying punk rocker, so I gave him the same speech pattern, this kind of the same attitude. He's talking about music and not motorcycles, but I hope immortalized Pete a little bit in that book, and I think it very much worked. So the next thing to do with this, and as you said, as you heard in the introduction, the next book is the last one. And so I'm kind of moving on. And so I'm not leaving, but I'll come back and talk about anything, I don't have to have a book. But, it's gone on for 30 years. And so I didn't want it to be really, kind of a Tom Brady-like exit, I didn't want to be throwing a crime novel interception in the end zone in the playoffs. And so the next one will be probably will be the last of this particular series. I write another series, and I may do that. I may write, just for my own benefit, at least, books where people do make it to the end, and it would be kind of refreshing and uplifting to write about people who are from a different world. So the difference there has been that this book, Robbed Blind, I keep holding it up. So this is like branding. This is going to be implanted in your brain. The difference between this one and the next one, which is called Hardline, and it comes out in probably the fall of 24, is that I didn't enter. It's a continuation. It's the first one I've done. And so it wasn't a blank canvas, I didn't have my blank screen. I didn't have just go to my well of ideas that have been in the back part of my mind. I needed to continue some of what I had left hanging in this one and also come up with something new. So it's been a challenge. It's been interesting to sustain a lot of tension for a whole other book. And also, in this case, to choose who makes it and who doesn't. And so I'm in the process of that right now. So the last thing I really wanted to ask you, and maybe because I'm intrigued by a lot of things about this as a career. And, I always remember years and years ago, my mother, who is no longer with us, really was a huge fan of my books. She subscribed to the New York Times Book Review and got it the whole year only to see if they did a positive review of my books. And if they didn't, I think she probably was on the phone to them saying, Gerry Boyle, no relation to me, has a new book. And she was great. She would go into bookstores and find my books. And if they weren't cover out, she'd rearrange the shelves. And so, the Stephen King guy, so she was a very proud parent, and I think if there are people here who are parents, you probably understand that. But I remember I was down at her house in Rhode Island one time, and there were people over, and she was, and they were asking about my books and blah, blah, blah. And she kind of, in this sort of aside, said, about the books, and she liked the books, but she said, but he really is a very nice man. As if you don't have to be afraid of him, he is not the character. He has nice children, they're cute. He's stable, I hope. And so that has always made me think, well, why do I do this to begin with? All of these people didn't exist before I wrote them or thought them up, and there's partly the magic of that. Sparrow didn't exist before I created her, and that's sort of a powerful thing. To me, she seems very real. And so, and her fate is in my hands. So, so there is the kind of the puppet master feeling. But in the end, you're creating a lot of crime and a lot of mayhem, as the introduction said, that didn't exist without you inventing it. And so, you think, well, isn't there enough mayhem in the real world without inventing fictional mayhem? Isn't there enough murder in the real world without inventing another? So that I sit there for months and months, and and I'm looking up. I don't know. You've seen the murder story down in Cohasset, Mass. I think it is, or somewhere in there, with the woman who had disappeared, and the guy, they just charged the husband. And one thing they went to was his searches, and there were all these gruesome things. Well, if they looked at my searches, I'm sure they'd say, whoa, this guy, let's check him out. Put a tail on him. Let's start monitoring everything he does. We had someone who came, and there was some service where you would get paid, and they would monitor your streaming on the internet or something. And I thought, oh no, we're not doing that. I can just see, because there are a lot of weird YouTube videos out there, I'll tell you, and just about anything. So what have I just recently searching for? Well, there's for a shotgun, I know I shoot shotguns, but I don't shoot them at people very often. So I didn't know how far the shotgun pellets go in, and what size shot goes in from what distance, and what the spread would be from a certain distance. So I had to do all this research to find out, okay, so if I want someone to be injured but not killed, do I use number 4? Do I use number 3? And how far away can I be? If I use buckshot, well, it's going to be a hole like this, and that's be the end of that person. But if I use number 4, well, it's going to spread at 60 feet out about this big. And people shoot these things at wax kind of models, and then they measure the depth of where each pellet goes in. And so it turns out, lo and behold, number 4 works every time. It only goes in maybe this far from that distance. And the only risk is you want to make sure it doesn't hit something really important, like an artery. And so you can't make sure of that, but sometimes the characters in my books do get lucky. And so that was the last search I did. I've done all kinds of things that are crime related or violence related. And so I do wonder, why am I doing this? This supposed, according to my mother, but everybody's mother likes their kid, right? They're supposed nice, the alleged nice guy. Why am I inventing all of this? And and why are you reading it? Why are true crime podcasts the most popular thing? Why is every Netflix crime show, on their top 10? And so, it's pretty, maybe it's obvious, but I still have to keep telling myself that that I invent this world where there is justice, and there's so, in some ways, little of it out in the kind of the real mayhem and chaos of the real world, that I'm able to invent a small closed world where these things happen and there are consequences. And so, no bad guys in my books ever get away with it. Sometimes no bad guys ever get away at all. And so, and that often means, McMorrow taking, and his buddy Claire taking things into their own hands in some ways. And that's happening in the next one a lot. Lewis, another character who's a veteran, is really continuing his Army commando life in real life. And I know this isn't real, you'd probably get, you would end up in jail pretty darn quick. But in my world, in the world of these novels, when you get to the end of that book, you may be sad that somebody didn't make it, but you're also I hope you'll have a feeling of take that, and also that there's some truth to that, and it emphasizes the need for that to exist in our world. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. I don't know what you've been doing, but I'm very eager to field any questions you have. And don't worry if you don't have a question, I'm just going to call on people. And so that will be, yes. Yeah.
I didn't realize that authors. I can speak.
There's millions of people listening to you.
Sure. I didn't realize that authors. Yes, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, pull over. There you go. Perfect.
This is harder. I didn't realize that authors actually turned their work in ahead of time and that they monitored them that closely while they were writing. I thought you just write a book and then you turn it in and then they say, oh, we don't like this part, change it or something.
Yes. Yeah, it varies. It depends on who your editor is. And I've had it both ways. I've had different publishers, and the editors have been very professional. But I had an agent, she's passed away. She was almost my first reader or second reader. My first reader was always my wife. And so we would go on vacation. And I usually, for some reason, for many years, I finished the book, in June, and we'd go to the coast and I'd plunk down this manuscript in front of her and I'd go fishing, so, and I didn't realize what that really must have felt like until years later. I mean, we went through quite a few books, but she was the first reader, but my agent was also a very good reader. My editor now at Islandport, Genevieve Morgan, is a very good reader. And if you trust somebody, you might go to them and say, I'm kind of stuck, or I'm not sure if this works. Or you might say, or just give them something. Usually I have to have the draft finished, but I know there's going to be 2 or 3 different versions before it is ready. And so she'll do the overview. And in this case, Rob Blind, a lot of it was trims because I like the characters so much. I was just chatting away with them like crazy. And so a lot of it was cut this, cut this, cut this. Of course, I saved it all. So I think there's that function. I've never had, usually you do pitch an idea, because when I was with Putnam, I would go to New York and it was a lunch at a fancy restaurant. And so it would be the editor and the agent, and they'd want to know, what do you, because I was doing 3-book contracts, what are the next 2? And so you'd have to kind of pitch him like an elevator pitch. And I didn't really like doing that because they always sounded stupid, until they're written. It sounds like a dumb idea, but what doesn't at that level? And so I would, I had one book that they both, all the people really rejected. And I, to this day, think I still might write that one because I liked it and I wasn't, it was business. So that's the way it turned out. But is that answer? Yes. Sorry.
Jerry,
Yes.
you mentioned that your wife was your first reader. Was that for one of 2 reasons? One, did she ever change anything or suggest that you don't do this?
Right.
Did she do that? Or?
This is garbage and throw it across the room. No, she reads very closely. She would sometimes say, well, I don't know about more. It usually was kind of motivational things. Sometimes when you're writing these books and you need something to happen at a certain time, and you think, well, all right, I'm going to make it happen. I'm in charge after all. And so you do that. And then she would say, I'm not sure that so-and-so would do this at that point. Or there were also, when I was writing woman characters, there would be things that I'd gotten wrong just in the nomenclature of womanness, and so she would fix those things. But mostly it was her alarm bells would go off and she'd say, this isn't right. You've got to work on this more. But fortunately, she likes my books, or I wouldn't have given her the second one. Right? So, no, she was very gracious about it, and she's very, she's really smart and a good reader, and so I respected her opinion. So, it's been a good partnership. So,
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I've heard or met the other events like this. The other New England crime mystery writer, Brattleboro, and
Archer Mayer.
Yeah. I'm bad with names.
Yeah.
Anyway, how do you fit into that crime mystery New England-based genre, or are you outside of it, or just on the edge of it, or
Yeah.
are you right up there? Do you rank up there with him?
Oh, I think I rank up there with everybody. Well, actually, I remember being at one of these. I used to go to crime novel conferences, and I kind of weaned myself off of that because, but I remember being on a panel with these people, and the question that often came of, who do you read? Who's your favorite? And this author who was quite accomplished, lived in Maine at the time, she said, I'm my favorite. I'm the best I know. And so I kind of remember that. But I think in my case, I think I started out and I was the only one in the 90s writing anything that wasn't a cozy, kind of cozy coastal thing, you know, and Murder, She Wrote-ish kind of stuff. And there was nobody else in this genre. And then because the setting was rural Maine, and it was also Milltown, Maine, and kind of the gritty rural Maine where that you didn't hear about at that time. Carolyn Shute, you know, but she wasn't in the genre. But, you know, people have this idea of Maine and it's very romantic, romanticized. And, you know, sometimes I think, God, you know, you have to have virtual reality goggles on all the time to think that exists, you know, and you read the paper, as Judy will tell you, you don't have to go very far to see that the world that I'm writing about or the world that I create is a lot closer to reality than many of the others. So I'm a lot grittier, I think, than some. And I'm also, I think, the setting of what does it say on here? No one writes the other Maine better than Gerry Boyle. And that's very nice, you know, but I also live in the other Maine. And so sometimes I think, other Maine, I'll show you the other Maine. I'll show you the other Maine. And so I think sometimes I feel like we have to show what's really out there and the kind of
30
people.
miles anywhere off the interstate, the corridor, 30 miles in.
Yeah, probably.
Other.
Yeah,
Now,
to the west.
Yeah.
Don't go east. Yeah,
Then,
yeah. Okay.
I wrote a book about Milltown, grew up in northern New Hampshire.
Yeah.
It's still available on interlibrary loan. There's one copy left in the tallest library in the world back at UMass Amherst, where I hung out until I was 50 years of age. And I went and saw my book there back in June. It's still there.
There you
You
go.
can read it.
All those people out there,
The Patriarch and the Prodigal Son.
it's there.
But it's nonfiction.
That's
But
okay. It's waiting for you.
These spoken word poems I get up and do with the local coffee houses, of which there aren't many left around anymore.
Right.
It's COVID, about the underbelly of society, kind
Oh,
of
good.
like a spiritual, psychosexual Stephen King, but reality version of things. And I don't have to do cocaine, and I don't have to imagine or invent, because I write about the real stuff when the shades go down at night and behind the collaborative White Houses in the church basement, you know, Hunter.
Right.
PTA.
Great. Well, congratulations to you. I agree with you. Yes, sir.
I'm very pleased there are new McMorrow books. But my question is, what challenges do you find in working with an older series character and maintaining it versus perhaps creating new characters in a new series?
Well, I did create a new series with the cop in Portland named Brandon Blake. There are 3 of those. If you haven't read them, they're really, really good, and you should read them. But they are, so I did that, and I had to, it was a little bit of a challenge because McMorrow is pretty much me, you know, in our experiences, you know, especially of the first 7 or 8 books. You know, if I was covering something in the newspapers, that was going to be my next book, you know, marijuana growers, back when that was illegal. And, you know, it was, so I knew how he thought because we did the same job. And also, so that was kind of in some ways a gimme, you know. When I did Brandon Blake, it was hard. I had to think, well, what's it like to be 23? You know, I hadn't been 23. So I showed it to my kids who were in their 20s at that time. And I'd say, what about this doesn't ring true? And it was interesting. The things that really didn't ring true to them were the romantic parts. So I guess I don't have any game anymore. So that was a challenge. And I think technology and all this, but in some ways, my characters, you know, I can preserve them in their state and in their time period. You know, I don't want them just sitting there doing Google searches all day. And so, you know, I remember when I first put a cell phone in a book, I kind of, you know, so it does get harder as the distance between you and the character broadens. Yeah.
In reading the books, did you start with the first and then go to the, is it a series in that way or?
No, it's not really. I would say that I wouldn't, I mean, I never presumed that anyone would have read the earlier books, and it seemed presumptuous to me. So I would say, well, you could start really with any of them. I don't know. So that was my intent. Some places, if you don't know the earlier characters, you're lost. And these, except for the three, everybody else is cycling in and cycling out. So I think you could do that.
First of all, I'm a big fan, and so thank you.
Thank you.
I happened to be working in Rumford years ago when I believe you were there with the Falls Times, and I believe that's when Deadline came out.
And it came out after I'd left, fortunately.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you never in the book defined Rumford and gave it that the name of the town, but it was clear that it was Rumford with the green metal bridge, although there are green metal bridges all across Maine, as we all know.
Right.
But my question is, it's interesting to me that you identify with Jack McMorrow because he's such a sterling character. And I'm curious if your wife is a social worker and what she thinks of the relationship between she and Jack, and if you have an affinity for Ballantine Ale.
Well, that's a lot of revealing. Yeah, in terms of the Roxanne Jack, things, she was teased a lot about that for a few years, and she used to joke about it. Is this like your fantasy wife or what is this? And just as she's not a social worker, but she was a teacher and school administrator. She was a very good teacher for many years. So she would come home with, it's like social work and some of the kids she was working with. And so she could understand that. And I think that assumption that, some people will read the books and if they know me, they're just picturing me, doing all this stuff, which I kind of take as a compliment, So this is kind of a very quick, funny aside. When the books came out and they're doing very well, I was still working at the Morning Sentinel in Waterville in the newsroom, writing columns. And I think I cut back from 3 to 2 to 1, all this, but I could feel, in hindsight, I could feel myself kind of getting this sort of swagger, and, because I had just written a passage where the whole chapter where McMorrow just cleaned house. And then I'd come into the newsroom, like, you looking at me, and so it's easy to do, it becomes kind of your Walter Mitty alter ego. And so that's kind of it. And so I think there's a lot of me in there. But there's also, he doesn't make any compromises. I was working very hard to make a living in newspapers, and it was a good living, but it was a pedal to the metal kind of business. And, and sometimes McMorrow, I'll go along and it's page, 238. He hasn't written anything yet. He hasn't written a story. And so I think, in Rob Blind, that I had to kind of face that. And there are things, for instance, that I can't, it'd be a spoiler, but the reality of the business comes back, finally catches up with him. And so he was the reporter. All the reporters I knew would say they would love to be Jack McMorrow. You can tell a source to stuff it. Someone takes a swing at you, you can knock them down the stairs, all these things that some part of your inner self would really love to be able to do, except you'd get arrested, you have children, your name would be in the paper, you get fired, you'd lose your health insurance, all the reality things that's left out. So, and Rumford was the model sort of for that book, more so than any of the other books. I just found Rumford absolutely fascinating. I loved it there. It was fun. So, I went back and did a book signing at a bookstore there, and I wasn't sure how. I was kind of went with some trepidation. I didn't know if people wouldn't like it, but they were good as always. The Rumford people are very warm and supportive. So, anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's been great just hearing you talk about like finding this cast of characters and kind of bringing them all to life in the books. When you're starting a new one, do you tend to know like how things are going to resolve, or do you kind of watch the characters get into trouble and then figure it out alongside them?
It varies from book to book. I think it helps to think you know how it's going to resolve before you start. Otherwise, it's somewhat overwhelming. But I would say that sometimes I know where I want to go. I know I can, like in the one I'm writing now, I needed the resolution because everything was going to build toward it. And so but a lot of the part in between, I just sit down every day and just see, gee, I wonder what's going to happen. And I think in that way, I think that can be better. You know, it can result in a lot of writing that never sees the light of day because you might go off in a different direction, or characters that become very minor who had a more major role earlier. But I think in general, you can't, I don't know, it's like if you were a movie director and you had these really talented actors, you know, they have the role and you just sort of let them go. And you don't tell them, act like this, you know, make your eyebrows go up, you know, your voice is, you know, you got to be angry, you know, that kind of, maybe they do, but I think in this case, I just sort of throw people together. And if I'm disconnected enough from my surroundings, then that works well. When it doesn't is when you're too conscious of that and you're self-conscious. You know, often, and here's one thing, if there are any writers, I think that you have to be very careful not to go faster than you've thought. You know, I can write fast, I can type fast, I can write dialogue all day long. But if I'm not at least alongside them, then you can get out, you know, ahead of your skis or whatever you want to call it. And so you end up writing a lot that's kind of aimless, but at the same time, you need to have people in place and then take a step back and just let them go. And so, you know, I've got a scene I'm writing now that I knew where McMorrow was going. I sort of knew who was going to be there when he got there, but I really still to this, you know, as I was driving down here, I was thinking, you know, God, what's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen here? And I have all these choices, but until I sit down tomorrow, I'm not sure what McMorrow is going to choose, you know, or what circumstances we'll choose. So last thing about that, I get my best ideas when I'm not thinking about it. You know, mowing the lawn's great. You know, you're going along, you're kind of in the zen, kind of, and then all of a sudden, boom, something comes to you, or the middle of the night when you're not even thinking about it. Or I once had a really good idea for one of the books, and I was painting the cupola on my barn. And so I was up pretty high, you know, I was outside the cupola. I'm tied on with this like safety thing, and I'm painting, and all of a sudden, this thing comes to me, and I had to unbuckle everything, you know, climb back inside, down the ladder, through this part of the barn, down to the first floor, and write it down before it slipped away. So there's a lot of subconscious at work.
Do you have time for one more, or do you want to?
I'm good. Yeah, that's right. Painted on the side of the barn.
Thank you. Jerry.
Yeah.
When you first started out writing your novels back, you know, long time ago, did you like write it in cursor, then type it up, or did you think of what you were going to do just on the typewriter?
Yeah, I always wrote a lot of it on legal pads, you know, not the actual book, but all the kind of actual book on legal pads. And I still do. I think writing cursive by hand is just a different part of your brain for some reason. And so I still do that. But in the first book I did on a Smith Corona portable electric typewriter that I got for my high school graduation, I think. I still have it in the barn somewhere. And I typed it out on copy paper that I filched from the newsroom every night when I went home. And I think there's a statute of limitations. I think I'm good. So I had stacks of this paper, and I would type, you know, until I had to stack this thick. Now, the technology is so easy, but back then it was just the way it was done. And I think it clearly worked, in some way. It was, but it was worthwhile. So thank you very much